The morning mist clung to the towering spires of Eldermore Palace like secrets refusing to be told. King Edmund Ashworth III stood at the towering windows of his private study, watching the sun pierce through the ancient oak trees that had witnessed 12 generations of Ashworth rulers. His reflection in the glass showed a man aged beyond his 58 years, silver threading through once golden hair, and eyes that held the weight of a crown he never truly wanted to wear. Behind him, on the mahogany desk that had belonged to his great-grandfather, lay documents that would change everything. The official papers bore the royal seal, but remained unsigned, waiting for a decision that would echo through the halls of power for generations to come. These weren't ordinary state documents. They were dissolution papers that would strip his wife, Queen Consort Isabella, of every privilege, title, and protection that came with her position. Edmund had never imagined he would be in this position. When he married Isabella Carmichael 7 years ago, she had been a breath of fresh air in the stuffy corridors of royal life. A successful architect from a middle-class family, she brought intelligence, compassion, and a modern perspective that the ancient monarchy desperately needed. The people loved her charitable work, her down-to-earth nature, and the way she could make anyone feel at ease, from foreign dignitaries to local shopkeepers. But love, Edmund had learned, was not always enough to protect someone from the machinations of power. The first whispers had begun 18 months ago. Anonymous letters arriving at the palace, photographs that seemed innocent enough, but carried implications that made his stomach turn. Someone was watching Isabella's every move, cataloging her meetings, her friendships, her private conversations. At first, Edmund had dismissed them as the work of tabloid journalists or attention-seeking troublemakers. The royal family had always been subject to scrutiny and wild speculation. However, as the months passed, the evidence became more specific, more damaging. Bank statements showing suspicious transactions, recorded conversations taken out of context, and, most damning of all, photographs of Isabella meeting with Marcus Thornfield, Edmund's estranged younger brother who had been exiled from the royal court 15 years ago following a scandal that nearly brought down the monarchy. Marcus had always been the charismatic one, the rebel who challenged every tradition and questioned every decision. Where Edmund was careful and measured, Marcus was bold and impulsive. Their father, King George Ashworth VII, had banished Marcus after discovering his involvement in selling state secrets to foreign powers, secrets that could have compromised national security and destroyed diplomatic relationships that had taken decades to build. The exile had been absolute. Marcus was stripped of his titles, his inheritance, and his place in the line of succession. He was forbidden from setting foot on royal property or making contact with any member of the royal family. For 15 years, that decree had held firm. Edmund had occasionally wondered about his brother's fate, but the demands of kingship had kept such thoughts at bay. Now, seeing Isabella in those photographs with Marcus, sharing what appeared to be intimate conversations in hidden locations around London, Edmund felt the familiar ache of betrayal that had marked his relationship with his brother since childhood. Marcus had always been able to charm anyone, convince them to see things his way, to believe in his version of truth even when evidence suggested otherwise. The palace's chief security advisor, Sir Christopher Hawthorne, had presented the evidence with the clinical efficiency of a man who had served the crown for over 30 years. Hawthorne was not given to dramatics or exaggeration. His reputation was built on facts, discretion, and unwavering loyalty to the monarchy. When he laid out the timeline of meetings, the financial irregularities, and the intercepted communications, even Edmund's faith in Isabella began to waver. "Your Majesty," Hawthorne had said during their private meeting 3 days ago, "I understand this is difficult, but we cannot ignore the pattern that has emerged. The Queen Consort has been in regular contact with Prince Marcus for at least 8 months. Money has been transferred from accounts associated with her charitable foundation to shell companies that we believe are controlled by your brother. We have reason to believe that sensitive information about upcoming trade negotiations and military deployments has been discussed during these meetings." Edmund had demanded to see every piece of evidence, to review every photograph and document until his eyes burned and his head pounded. He had hoped to find some innocent explanation, some misunderstanding that would make sense of what appeared to be an impossible situation. Isabella, working with the brother who had betrayed everything their family stood for. It seemed like a nightmare rather than reality. But the evidence was overwhelming. Photographs showed Isabella entering a small flat in Kensington where Marcus was staying under an assumed name. Financial records revealed payments that corresponded with her visits. Most damaging of all were the partial transcripts of conversations where Isabella appeared to be sharing details about Edmund's private discussions with government ministers and foreign ambassadors. The implications went far beyond personal betrayal. If Isabella was indeed passing information to Marcus, and if Marcus was still connected to the foreign interests that had caused his original exile, then the security of the entire nation could be at risk. Trade deals worth billions of pounds, military strategies, diplomatic negotiations, all of it could be compromised. Edmund's private secretary, James Morrison, knocked softly on the study door. Morrison had served the royal family for over 20 years and had never seen his king in such distress. "Your Majesty, the Prime Minister's office has called again. They need your decision by noon if the emergency session of Parliament is to be convened." The Prime Minister, Sarah Blackwood, had been briefed on the situation by Hawthorne 2 days ago. Her response had been swift and uncompromising. Isabella had to be removed from her position immediately before the scandal broke publicly and caused irreparable damage to the monarchy and the government. Blackwood had seen what happened to other royal families when such scandals erupted. The investigations, the media frenzy, the public loss of confidence that could take decades to rebuild. "The papers are ready for your signature," Morrison continued gently. "The legal team has ensured that everything is in order. Once signed, the Queen Consort will be stripped of her titles, her security detail will be withdrawn, and she will be required to leave royal residences within 48 hours. Edmund turned from the window, his gaze falling on the unsigned documents. The formal language couldn't disguise what he was being asked to do: destroy the woman he loved based on evidence that, while compelling, still left room for doubt. He had not confronted Isabella directly about the allegations. Hawthorne had insisted that doing so could compromise the ongoing investigation and potentially allow evidence to be destroyed. But how could he sign papers that would ruin Isabella's life without giving her a chance to explain? How could he trust the word of advisors and investigators over the woman who had shared his bed, his hopes, his fears for 7 years? The memory of their wedding day flashed through his mind. Isabella had looked radiant in the cathedral, surrounded by representatives from dozens of nations, her smile genuine despite the enormous pressure of the moment. During their private vows, she had promised to stand by him through whatever challenges the crown might bring, to protect the institution even at personal cost, to never do anything that would bring shame or danger to the royal family. Had those vows meant nothing? Had she been planning even then to betray him with Marcus? Edmund's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the fountain pen that would seal Isabella's fate. The weight of it seemed enormous, as if it were made of lead rather than gold and silver. Every signature he had made as king had carried consequence, but none had felt as personal, as devastating as this would be. A soft sound in the corridor outside made him pause. It was Isabella's laugh, the warm, musical sound that had first captured his attention at a charity gala 8 years ago. She was speaking with Lady Margaret Worthington, her lady-in-waiting and closest friend at court. Their conversation was muffled by the heavy oak door, but Edmund could hear the genuine affection in Isabella's voice as she discussed plans for the children's hospital fundraiser scheduled for the following month. How could someone who cared so deeply about helping sick children be capable of betraying her country? How could the woman who held his hand during his father's final illness, who had supported him through the difficult first years of his reign, who had transformed from an outsider into one of the most beloved royal consorts in British history, be working with his exiled brother to undermine everything they had built together? The contradiction tore at Edmund's heart, but the evidence remained undeniable. Hawthorne had even provided psychological analysis from experts who explained how intelligent people could be manipulated, how emotional attachments could be exploited, how someone like Marcus, charming, persuasive, desperate, could convince even someone as principled as Isabella to betray her deepest convictions. Perhaps Isabella had been trying to help Marcus, believing she could reform him or protect him from the consequences of his past actions. Perhaps she thought she could control the situation, feed him harmless information to satisfy his need for connection to the royal family, while keeping truly sensitive material secure. Such thinking would be naive, but not necessarily malicious. But naivety, when it came to matters of national security, could be just as dangerous as deliberate treachery. Edmund set the pen down and walked to the portrait of his father that hung above the fireplace. King George had been a stern man, devoted to duty above all else. When he discovered Marcus's betrayal 15 years ago, he had not hesitated to take decisive action, despite the personal pain it caused him. The crown comes first, he had told Edmund. Personal feelings, family loyalty, love itself, all of it must be secondary to the responsibility we bear to our people. At the time, Edmund had thought his father's response harsh, perhaps even cruel. Now, facing his own impossible choice, he understood the terrible wisdom in those words. A king could not afford to let personal feelings cloud judgment when national security was at stake. The crown did come first, no matter how much it hurt to acknowledge that truth. The telephone on his desk rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Hawthorne, calling to report that Marcus had been spotted leaving London on a private flight to Switzerland, a country with no extradition treaty with Britain. If Marcus was indeed involved in espionage or financial crimes, his departure suggested that he knew the investigation was closing in. "Your Majesty," Hawthorne said, his voice grave, "we believe Prince Marcus may have accelerated his timeline. If he's fleeing the country, it suggests that whatever operation he and the Queen Consort have been conducting may be nearing completion. We cannot afford to delay action any longer." The news hit Edmund like a physical blow. If Marcus was fleeing, it lent credibility to all the other evidence. An innocent man would stay and fight the accusations, would demand the chance to clear his name. Flight suggested guilt, and if Marcus was guilty, then Isabella's involvement became even more certain. Edmund thanked Hawthorne and hung up the phone, then walked slowly back to his desk. The unsigned papers seemed to glow in the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. His signature would set in motion events that could never be undone. Isabella would go from Queen Consort to exile in a matter of hours. Her charitable work, her public appearances, her role in state functions, all of it would end immediately. But what choice did he have? If he protected Isabella, and she was indeed guilty of betraying state secrets, the scandal would eventually break anyway. The investigation would continue, more evidence would emerge, and when the truth came out, Edmund would be seen as either complicit or incompetent. Either perception would damage the monarchy beyond repair. If he acted decisively now, if he demonstrated that no one, not even the Queen Consort, was above the law or beyond accountability, he might be able to contain the damage. The public would see a king who put duty before personal feelings, who protected national security even at enormous personal cost. Edmund picked up the pen once more, his hand steadier now that his decision was made. He signed his name with careful precision, the scratching of the nib against paper the only sound in the silent study. Each letter felt like a small death, each stroke of ink a step further away from the man he had been just moments before. When the final signature was complete, Edmund set the pen aside and pressed the royal seal into the warm wax that Morrison had prepared. The ancient symbol of his authority, the lion and unicorn that had represented the Ashworth dynasty for over 4 centuries, pressed into the red wax, making his decision official and irrevocable. Isabella's fate was sealed. As Edmund gathered the signed documents, preparing to hand them to Morrison for immediate implementation, he caught sight of a photograph on his desk, a picture of him and Isabella taken during their visit to Scotland the previous summer. They were laughing at something off camera, their faces bright with genuine happiness, her hand resting trustingly on his arm. Had that happiness been real, or had it been part of an elaborate deception? Had the woman he loved ever truly existed, or had she been a creation designed to get close to him, to gain access to the secrets that could be sold to the highest bidder? Edmund placed the photograph face down on the desk. Those questions might never be answered, but the decision was made. In a few hours, Isabella would learn that her life as she knew it was over. By evening, she would be gone from the palace, stripped of her titles, her security, her position, her place in the only world she had known for 7 years. And Edmund would be alone, left to wonder whether he had saved the crown or destroyed the only genuine love he had ever known. Isabella stood in the rose garden behind Eldermore Palace, her fingers trailing over the velvet petals of the Queen Elizabeth roses that had been planted in honor of the late queen. The morning sun cast everything in golden light, and, for a moment, she could almost forget the growing tension she had sensed in the palace over the past few weeks. Edmund had been distant, their conversations stilted and formal even in private moments. When she tried to ask what was troubling him, he deflected with mentions of state business and parliamentary concerns. She had attributed his behavior to the stress of the upcoming trade negotiations with the European Union, talks that could reshape Britain's economic future and cement Edmund's legacy as either a visionary leader or a monarch who had presided over national decline. The weight of such decisions would make anyone withdrawn and preoccupied. But this morning felt different. Lady Margaret Worthington, her lady-in-waiting and dearest friend at court, had seemed nervous during their usual morning briefing about the day's scheduled events. The staff moved with an unusual efficiency that suggested preparation for something significant, though Isabella couldn't determine what that might be. "Your Majesty," came a voice behind her. Isabella turned to see James Morrison, the king's private secretary, approaching with measured steps. His usually warm demeanor seemed strained, and he avoided making direct eye contact. "His Majesty requests your presence in his private study immediately." Something in Morrison's tone made Isabella's stomach tighten with apprehension. In 7 years of marriage, Edmund had never summoned her with such formality to his private study. Their relationship had always been built on easy communication and mutual respect. Even during their rare disagreements, they resolved them privately and personally, never through intermediaries or formal requests. "Of course," Isabella replied, smoothing her pale blue dress and following Morrison through the garden entrance into the palace. The corridors seemed longer than usual, her heels echoing on the marble floors with an almost ominous rhythm. Staff members they passed offered their usual respectful greetings, but Isabella noticed several of them looking away quickly, as if they knew something she didn't. When Morrison opened the door to Edmund's study and announced her arrival, Isabella was struck by how formal the setting appeared. Edmund stood behind his desk rather than rising to greet her as he normally would. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture she recognized as his attempt to maintain rigid self-control. "Please, sit down," Edmund said, indicating the chair across from his desk rather than the comfortable seating area where they usually had private conversations. Isabella remained standing. "Edmund, what's this about? You're frightening me." For a moment, his composed facade flickered, and she saw the man she had married, vulnerable, conflicted, struggling with pain. But the moment passed quickly, and the formal mask returned. "I have received information," Edmund began, his voice carefully measured, "that raises serious questions about your conduct and loyalty to the crown." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. "My loyalty? What are you talking about?" Edmund moved to a file cabinet and withdrew a thick folder, placing it on the desk between them. "I know about Marcus." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. Of all the things Edmund might have discovered, this was perhaps the most complicated to explain, the most easily misunderstood. "Edmund, I can explain, can you?" Edmund's voice rose slightly before he caught himself and resumed his measured tone. "Can you explain why you've been meeting secretly with my exiled brother for the past 8 months? Can you explain the financial transactions between accounts associated with your charitable foundation and shell companies controlled by Marcus? Can you explain why you've been discussing sensitive state matters in locations where those conversations could be recorded and transmitted to hostile foreign powers?" Each question landed like a blow, but it was the pain in Edmund's eyes rather than the accusations themselves that made Isabella's heart break. She could see that he didn't want to believe what he was saying, that this confrontation was causing him as much anguish as it was causing her. "Please," Isabella said, reaching toward him, "let me explain what really happened." Edmund stepped back, maintaining the distance between them. "Then explain. Help me understand how the woman I love, the woman I trusted with state secrets, and the future of our monarchy, could betray everything we've built together." Isabella sank into the chair, her mind racing as she tried to find words that would make Edmund understand the impossible situation she had found herself in 8 months ago. The truth was complicated, messy, and would require Edmund to believe in her intentions even when her actions appeared damning. "It started with a letter," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "A letter delivered to my personal office at the Children's Hospital Foundation. It was from Marcus, but not in his real name. He said he had information about threats against you, against our family, and that he needed to meet with me to ensure your safety." Edmund's expression didn't change, but she could see him listening intently. "I should have told you immediately," Isabella continued. "I know that now. But the letter contained details about your schedule, about security arrangements that only someone with inside knowledge could have known. Marcus claimed that there were people in your inner circle who were planning to harm you, and that if I told anyone about his contact, those same people would know he was trying to expose them. So you chose to trust the brother who betrayed my family rather than trust me," Edmund said, his voice heavy with hurt. "I chose to protect you," Isabella replied fiercely. Marcus said that if I could meet with him, he could provide evidence of the plot against you. He claimed he had been trying to make amends for his past mistakes, that he had discovered this conspiracy while trying to build a new life, and that warning you was his way of earning forgiveness. Edmund picked up one of the photographs from the folder and placed it in front of her. It showed her entering the Kensington flat, her face partially obscured by a scarf and sunglasses. This doesn't look like someone meeting to protect her husband. This looks like someone engaged in clandestine activity. Isabella stared at the photograph, remembering that day with painful clarity. Because I was terrified, she said. Marcus had told me that the people plotting against you included members of your security team, possibly even people in the government. He said that if I was seen meeting with him openly, or if anyone knew about our contact, they would move against you immediately. She looked up at Edmund, willing him to see the truth in her eyes. I was trying to get evidence that I could bring to you, proof of who was behind the threats. Marcus promised he had documents, recordings, financial records that would expose everything. But every time I met with him, he said he needed more time, that the evidence wasn't complete, that moving too quickly would put you in even greater danger. And the money? Edmund asked. How do you explain the financial transfers? Isabella closed her eyes, knowing how damaging this part would sound. Marcus said he needed funds to pay for security, to protect the sources who were providing him with information about the plot. He claimed his own resources were being watched, that any financial activity from his known accounts would alert the conspirators. So you gave him money from your charitable foundation, Edmund said, his tone suggesting this was perhaps the most damaging revelation of all. You used funds donated by people who trusted you to help sick children, and you gave that money to my exiled brother based on his word alone. Small amounts, Isabella said desperately. Never more than a few £1,000s at a time, and I kept careful records. I planned to repay every penny once this was resolved. I thought I was buying time, paying for information that would save your life. Edmund was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to detect any sign of deception. And what did you tell Marcus about our private conversations? What information did you share with him? This was the question Isabella had been dreading most. He would ask about your mood, your stress levels, whether you had mentioned feeling threatened or suspicious of anyone. I thought I was helping him understand whether the conspiracy was having any effect on you, whether the plotters were getting close to making their move. You discussed my meetings with the Prime Minister, with foreign ambassadors, with military leaders, Edmund said, reading from what appeared to be a transcript. You told him about the trade negotiations, about troop deployments, about diplomatic strategies. Only general information, Isabella insisted. Nothing specific, nothing that would compromise actual security. Marcus said he needed to understand the full picture to identify how the conspirators might try to use your official duties against you. Even as she spoke, Isabella could hear how naive her explanations sounded. Every decision that had seemed reasonable in isolation now appeared as part of a pattern of betrayal when viewed from Edmund's perspective. She had been manipulated, she realized, played by someone who understood exactly how to exploit her love for Edmund and her desire to protect him. Did it never occur to you, Edmund asked quietly, that Marcus himself might be the threat? That his original exile was for precisely this kind of manipulation and betrayal? Isabella felt tears beginning to form. It did, especially in recent weeks, when he kept delaying the promised evidence, when he kept asking for more information, more money. I was beginning to suspect that I had made a terrible mistake. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small recording device. That's why I recorded our last meeting 3 days ago. I was going to confront him, demand the evidence he had promised, and if he couldn't provide it, I was going to tell you everything and let you decide how to handle the situation. Edmund stared at the recording device as if it were a dangerous weapon. You recorded your conversation with Marcus? I was finally beginning to understand that he might be lying to me, Isabella said. I wanted proof of what he was really after, evidence that I could bring to you to explain why I had been so foolish. And what did that conversation reveal? Isabella's voice broke slightly as she answered, that there was no conspiracy against you. That Marcus had been feeding me lies from the beginning, using my love for you and my fear for your safety to get information he could sell to foreign intelligence services. When I confronted him with my suspicions, he laughed at me, called me a naive little girl who had been useful but was becoming too suspicious to be trusted. Edmund's carefully controlled expression finally cracked, revealing the pain and anger beneath. So you knew you had been betrayed, you knew Marcus had been using you, and yet you still didn't come to me. I was terrified, Isabella whispered. Terrified of what you would think of me, of how you would react when you learned what I had done. I thought if I could gather evidence of Marcus's deception, if I could prove that my intentions had been good even though my actions were wrong, you might be able to forgive me. She looked up at him with desperate eyes. I love you, Edmund. Everything I did, however misguided, was because I love you and wanted to protect you. Marcus exploited that love, used it as a weapon against both of us. Edmund picked up the recording device, turning it over in his hands. Even if that's true, Isabella, even if your intentions were good, the damage has been done. Information has been compromised, national security has been breached, and the integrity of the monarchy has been called into question. I know, Isabella said, tears now flowing freely. I know I've made terrible mistakes, that my naivety has had serious consequences. But please don't let Marcus destroy our marriage along with everything else. Please don't let him win by making you believe that my love for you is false. Edmund set the recording device on his desk next to the signed papers that would strip Isabella of her titles and position. The decision has already been made, he said quietly. The papers have been signed. Your titles are being revoked, your security detail is being withdrawn, and you have 48 hours to leave royal residences. Isabella felt the world collapse around her. Edmund, no, please. We can work through this together. We can find a way to repair the damage, to rebuild the trust. The Prime Minister has been briefed, Edmund continued, his voice becoming more distant with each word. Parliament will be informed this afternoon. A public announcement will be made tomorrow explaining that the Queen Consort's position has been terminated due to security concerns. And what about us? Isabella asked desperately. What about our marriage? 3 weeks after Isabella's exile from Eldermore Palace, King Edmund sat in his study staring at the recording device she had left behind. He had not yet found the courage to listen to it, despite the growing doubts that plagued his sleepless nights. The palace felt hollow without Isabella's presence, her laughter no longer echoing through the corridors, her charitable work abandoned mid-project, leaving thousands of sick children wondering why their beloved patron had simply vanished. The official story released to the press had been carefully crafted to minimize scandal while explaining Isabella's sudden disappearance from public life. Due to irreconcilable differences regarding royal duties and personal conduct, the statement read, His Majesty and the Queen Consort have agreed to separate. The Queen Consort will no longer participate in royal functions and has relinquished all titles associated with her position. But the public wasn't buying the sanitized explanation. Social media exploded with speculation, conspiracy theories, and demands for the truth. Isabella had been genuinely beloved by the people, seen as a modernizing force who brought authenticity and compassion to an institution often perceived as cold and outdated. Her sudden exile created a public relations nightmare that grew worse with each passing day. Sir Christopher Hawthorne entered the study without his usual confident bearing. The chief security advisor had been conducting an intensive investigation into Marcus's activities, and what he had discovered was troubling in ways that went far beyond the original concerns about Isabella's loyalty. Your Majesty, Hawthorne began, we've completed our analysis of Prince Marcus's communications and financial activities. What we've found suggests that the situation is far more complex than we initially believed. Edmund looked up from the recording device, grateful for any distraction from his internal torment. What have you discovered? Hawthorne placed a thick folder on the desk, his expression grim. Prince Marcus has been involved in a sophisticated intelligence operation, but not in the way we originally suspected. Our investigation reveals that he was being targeted by a foreign intelligence service, specifically, agents working for a coalition of European competitors who wanted to undermine Britain's position in the upcoming trade negotiations. The revelation hit Edmund like a cold wave. You're saying Marcus was a target, not a perpetrator? It's more complicated than that, Hawthorne continued. Prince Marcus was approached by these agents approximately 10 months ago, shortly after intelligence about his exile and his financial difficulties became known through carefully leaked information. The agents offered him substantial sums of money in exchange for access to royal family information, particularly anything related to trade negotiations and diplomatic strategies. Edmund felt his chest tighten, and he accepted their offer. Initially, yes, Hawthorne admitted. Prince Marcus's financial situation was desperate. He had accumulated substantial gambling debts and was facing threats from creditors. The foreign agents exploited this vulnerability, offering him enough money to clear his debts in exchange for whatever information he could provide about the royal family's activities. So Isabella was right to be suspicious of him. Hawthorne paused, choosing his words carefully. Your Majesty, this is where the situation becomes more complex. Our investigation suggests that Prince Marcus experienced what his handlers would later describe as an inconvenient attack of conscience approximately 8 months ago, right around the time he first contacted the Queen Consort. Edmund's hands trembled slightly as he processed this information. 8 months ago, when Isabella said she received his first letter. According to intercepted communications between the foreign agents, Prince Marcus had begun expressing reluctance to continue providing information. He claimed he was having second thoughts about betraying his family, regardless of how they had treated him. The agents were becoming frustrated with his lack of cooperation and began threatening him. The implications of Hawthorne's words were staggering. Edmund felt as if the foundation of everything he believed about the past months was shifting beneath him. Are you telling me, Edmund said slowly, that Marcus contacted Isabella because he wanted to warn us about the foreign operation? That appears to be the case, Your Majesty. Our analysis of his communications suggests that he reached out to the Queen Consort because he feared direct contact with you would be dismissed as a manipulation attempt, given his history. He thought she might be more willing to listen to warnings about threats against your safety. Edmund stood abruptly, pacing to the window as he tried to process this revelation. But the evidence against Isabella, the financial transfers, the information she shared with him, the financial transfers were genuine, Hawthorne acknowledged. But according to our investigation, Prince Marcus was using that money to pay for security protection for sources who were helping him gather evidence against the foreign operation. The information the Queen Consort shared with him was carefully limited to general details that wouldn't compromise actual security, but would be sufficient to convince the foreign agents that he still had access to valuable intelligence. The room seemed to spin around Edmund as the full scope of his mistake became clear. You're saying Marcus was working against the foreign operation, not for it. Prince Marcus appears to have been attempting to conduct his own counterintelligence operation, Your Majesty. He was trying to identify all the foreign agents involved, document their methods and objectives, and gather evidence that could be used to expose the entire network. His plan was to present this information to you as proof of his loyalty and as a way to make amends for his past betrayals. Edmund felt physically ill, and Isabella was helping him, believing she was protecting me from threats that were actually real. The threats were very real, Your Majesty. The foreign intelligence operation was extensive and sophisticated. Prince Marcus's decision to work against them put him in considerable personal danger, which is why he was so secretive about his activities and why he fled to Switzerland when he realized our investigation was closing in. Hawthorne opened the folder and withdrew a series of documents. These are communications we intercepted between the foreign agents after Prince Marcus's departure. They're planning to accelerate their operations, taking advantage of the chaos created by the Queen Consort's exile to plant false information and create diplomatic incidents that could damage Britain's negotiating position. Edmund stared at the documents, but the words blurred together as the magnitude of his error became overwhelming. How could we have misinterpreted the evidence so completely? The foreign agents were very sophisticated, Your Majesty. They created a false trail of evidence designed to make Prince Marcus appear to be working for them, knowing that if such evidence was discovered, it would lead to exactly the kind of reaction we had. They wanted the Queen Consort discredited and removed from her position because her charitable work and public popularity were actually helping to strengthen Britain's soft power and diplomatic influence. The explanation hit Edmund like a physical blow. Not only had he destroyed his marriage based on false assumptions, but he had played directly into his enemy's hands. By exiling Isabella, he had accomplished exactly what the foreign intelligence operation had hoped to achieve. Where is Isabella now? Edmund asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She's staying at a small cottage in the Cotswolds, Your Majesty. A property she purchased privately before your marriage. She's been living there quietly, avoiding all contact with the media. Edmund picked up the recording device from his desk, his hands shaking. And this recording she left, we've analyzed it, Your Majesty. It contains Prince Marcus's confession about the foreign intelligence operation, his explanation of why he had been working to expose it, and his admission that he had been using the Queen Consort's desire to protect you to gather intelligence about the threats you were facing. He used her love for me against her, Edmund said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. Initially, yes. But, according to the recording, Prince Marcus came to deeply regret involving her. He realized that his actions were putting her in an impossible position and were likely to destroy her marriage and her life. The recording contains his apology to both you and the Queen Consort, and his explanation of the evidence he had gathered against the foreign operation. Edmund felt tears forming in his eyes for the first time since his father's funeral. I've ruined everything, haven't I? I've destroyed the woman I love based on lies and manipulation. Hawthorne's expression softened with something approaching sympathy. Your Majesty, you acted on the best information available at the time. The evidence appeared overwhelming, and you had to prioritize national security. The foreign agents counted on exactly that kind of reasonable response to their manufactured evidence. But Edmund wasn't comforted by the explanation. As king, he was supposed to see beyond surface appearances, to understand the complex motivations and hidden agendas that drove political and personal actions. He had failed in that responsibility, and his failure had cost him the most important relationship in his life. Can this be undone? Edmund asked desperately. Can Isabella be restored to her position? Can our marriage be saved? Hawthorne hesitated before answering. The legal aspects could potentially be reversed, Your Majesty. The divorce papers haven't been finalized, and the parliamentary announcement could be retracted with proper explanation. But the personal damage. The personal damage may be irreparable, Edmund finished. I accused her of treason, stripped her of her titles, and cast her out of the only family she had known for 7 years. I chose to believe the worst possible interpretation of her actions rather than trusting in her love and loyalty. Perhaps, Hawthorne suggested gently, the Queen Consort would be willing to listen to an explanation and an apology. Edmund laughed bitterly. An apology? What apology could possibly be sufficient for what I've done to her? I didn't just doubt her. I threw away 7 years of marriage, 7 years of trust and partnership based on evidence I should have questioned more thoroughly. He walked to the portrait of his father, remembering the advice about putting duty before personal feelings. But what happened when duty and personal feelings weren't in conflict? What happened when protecting personal relationships was actually the path that best served the crown? There's something else, Your Majesty, Hawthorne said quietly. The foreign intelligence operation is ongoing. With Prince Marcus in exile and unable to continue his counterintelligence work, and with the Queen Consort removed from her position, the agents are now focusing on other targets within the government and royal household. Edmund turned back to his security advisor. What kind of targets? They're attempting to recruit sources close to the Prime Minister, to your personal staff, and to key figures in the trade negotiation team. Without Prince Marcus's intelligence about their methods and objectives, we're operating blind against an enemy we still don't fully understand. The implications were clear. Edmund's hasty actions hadn't just destroyed his marriage. They had also eliminated 2 of his most valuable assets in fighting the ongoing foreign intelligence operation. Marcus's counterintelligence work and Isabella's potential role in identifying and countering hostile influences were both lost. We need to contact Marcus immediately, Edmund said. We need to bring him back and get access to all the intelligence he gathered about this operation. Prince Marcus has agreed to cooperate, Your Majesty, but he's insisting on certain conditions. He wants his exile formally ended, his titles restored, and a full public explanation of his role in exposing the foreign intelligence operation. He also wants assurances about the Queen Consort's treatment. Edmund felt a surge of anger at his brother's demands, followed immediately by the recognition that Marcus was in the right. He had been working to protect the royal family and had been vilified for his efforts. He deserved acknowledgement and vindication. And what about Isabella? Edmund asked. What are her conditions for returning? Hawthorne looked uncomfortable. The Queen Consort hasn't been contacted about the possibility of return, Your Majesty. We thought you would want to handle that conversation personally. Edmund stared at the recording device again, finally, understanding that listening to it would only confirm what he already knew, that he had made the worst mistake of his life. Isabella had tried to protect him, had been manipulated and deceived by forces beyond her understanding, and had been punished for her loyalty rather than rewarded for it. Prepare a car, Edmund said suddenly. I'm going to the Cotswolds. Your Majesty, perhaps it would be better to call first. No, Edmund said firmly. I destroyed our marriage with formal papers and official procedures. If there's any chance of saving it, that won't happen through intermediaries and protocols. I need to face Isabella personally and ask for her forgiveness, even though I know I don't deserve it. As Edmund prepared to leave the palace, he realized that the next few hours would determine not just his personal future, but the future of the monarchy itself. If Isabella couldn't forgive him, If their marriage couldn't be rebuilt, then he would face the rest of his reign alone, knowing that he had sacrificed the most genuine relationship in his life for the sake of crown and country. But if there was even a small chance that love could survive betrayal, that trust could be rebuilt after being shattered, then perhaps the damage could be repaired. Perhaps the foreign intelligence operation's greatest victory, turning the king and queen consort against each other, could still be defeated. Edmund tucked the recording device into his jacket pocket and headed for the door. Whatever happened in the Cotswolds, whatever Isabella's reaction to his arrival, at least he would finally face the full truth of what he had done and what he had lost. The stone cottage nestled in the rolling hills of the Cotswolds looked like something from a fairy tale, with ivy climbing its walls and a garden bursting with wildflowers that Isabella had planted during happier times. Edmund sat in the back of the unmarked car, watching the cottage for several minutes before finding the courage to approach the front door. This was the retreat Isabella had purchased years before their marriage, a place where she could escape the pressures of royal life and remember who she had been before the crown changed everything. Edmund dismissed his security detail, insisting on privacy for what might be the most important conversation of his life. He walked slowly up the cobblestone path, noting the small changes Isabella had made in the 3 weeks since her exile. New flowers in the window boxes, a different wreath on the door, signs that she was trying to build some semblance of a normal life away from the palace. When he knocked, there was a long silence before he heard footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal Isabella wearing a simple sundress and gardening gloves, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail that made her look younger and more vulnerable than he remembered. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between them like an invisible barrier. "Edmund," Isabella said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't expecting you." "May I come in?" he asked, surprised by how formal he sounded. "We need to talk." Isabella hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. The cottage's interior was cozy and welcoming, filled with furniture and artwork that reflected Isabella's personal taste rather than the formal requirements of royal residences. Edmund noticed photographs from their marriage scattered around the room, as if Isabella couldn't bear to put them away entirely, but also couldn't bear to look at them directly. "Would you like tea?" Isabella asked, pulling off her gardening gloves. "Please." Edmund sat on the sofa, feeling oddly out of place in the informal setting. Palace protocols had no meaning here. This was Isabella's sanctuary, and he was a guest who had forfeited any automatic welcome. As Isabella prepared tea in the small kitchen, Edmund studied the cottage that had been her refuge from royal life. Books filled every available shelf, paintings by local artists covered the walls, and fresh flowers brought color and life to every room. This was the home of someone who valued beauty, comfort, and authenticity over status and formality. Isabella returned with a tea service that looked handmade rather than purchased from expensive shops. She poured carefully, her movements precise but tense, as if she were hosting a stranger rather than the man she had been married to for 7 years. "I've learned some things," Edmund began, then stopped, realizing how inadequate that opening sounded. "Isabella, I need to tell you that I was wrong. About everything." She looked up from her teacup, her expression guarded. "Wrong about what, specifically?" Edmund reached into his jacket and withdrew the recording device. "I listened to this. I heard Marcus's confession, his explanation of what he was really doing. I know now that you were trying to protect me, not betray me." Isabella stared at the recording device as if it were a weapon that had once been used against her. "And do you believe it? Or do you think Marcus was lying on that recording too?" The pain in her voice cut through Edmund's composure. "I believe it. I believe you. I know now that you were manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to exploit your love for me and your desire to keep me safe. Your security advisor concluded that Marcus was telling the truth. Hawthorne has uncovered evidence of an extensive foreign intelligence operation. Marcus was working against them, not for them. The evidence that appeared to show your betrayal was manufactured by foreign agents who wanted to destroy your credibility and remove you from your position." Isabella set down her teacup with shaking hands. "So I was right to be suspicious of Marcus's story, but wrong to trust him with information about you. You were caught in an impossible situation," Edmund said gently. "Marcus was using your love for me to gather intelligence, but he was doing it to protect us from real threats, not to sell information to our enemies. The foreign agents were counting on exactly the kind of misunderstanding that occurred." Isabella stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where she had been working when Edmund arrived. Do you have any idea what the last 3 weeks have been like for me? Knowing that the man I love believes I betrayed him, that everything I tried to do to protect our marriage actually destroyed it. Edmund joined her at the window, maintaining a careful distance. I can't imagine. I can't imagine the pain I've caused you by refusing to trust in your love, by choosing to believe the worst instead of giving you the benefit of the doubt. I kept thinking, Isabella continued, her voice breaking slightly, that if I had just told you about Marcus's first contact, if I had been brave enough to admit my fears and ask for your help instead of trying to handle everything alone, none of this would have happened. The fault isn't yours, Edmund said firmly. I should have questioned the evidence more thoroughly. I should have confronted you directly instead of making decisions based on surveillance and speculation. I should have remembered that you've never given me any reason to doubt your loyalty or your love. Isabella turned to face him, tears flowing freely now. But I did give you reason to doubt me. I met secretly with your exiled brother. I gave him money from my foundation. I discussed your private conversations with him. Even if my intentions were good, my actions were wrong. Edmund reached toward her, then stopped himself. Your actions were the actions of someone who was frightened for her husband's safety and was being manipulated by an expert at deception. Marcus spent 15 years perfecting his ability to make people believe his version of reality. And what happens now? Isabella asked. You know the truth. You understand what really happened. But can we go back to the way things were? Can you ever trust me completely again, knowing how easily I was deceived? The question hung between them, highlighting the central problem they faced. Even if Edmund could forgive Isabella's actions, even if he could understand the impossible position she had been placed in, the fundamental trust that had been the foundation of their marriage had been severely damaged. I don't know, Edmund admitted. I want to say yes. I want to believe that we can rebuild what was broken, but I understand if you can't forgive me for what I've done to you. Isabella looked at him in surprise. What you've done to me? I chose to believe you were capable of treason rather than trusting in 7 years of marriage. I stripped you of your titles, cast you out of your home, and prepared to divorce you without even giving you a chance to explain your side of the story. I let outside forces destroy the most important relationship in my life. Isabella moved closer to him, studying his face as if seeing him clearly for the first time in months. You were trying to protect the crown, to put duty before personal feelings. Isn't that what kings are supposed to do? Not when duty and personal feelings aren't actually in conflict, Edmund replied. I convinced myself that I had to choose between loving you and protecting the monarchy, but that was a false choice. Trusting you, supporting you, investigating the threats together, that would have served both our marriage and the crown better than anything I actually did. Isabella reached out tentatively and touched his hand. Marcus was very convincing, Edmund. He showed me photographs of people watching you, gave me details about your schedule that he couldn't have known without inside information, created a sense of urgency that made me feel like waiting or consulting with others would put you in immediate danger. He was using the same techniques that made him valuable to foreign intelligence services, Edmund said. Creating false urgency, exploiting emotional vulnerabilities, making people feel like they had to act immediately without thinking through the consequences. They stood together in silence for several minutes, both processing the magnitude of the deception that had been orchestrated against them. The foreign intelligence operation had been brilliantly conceived. It had turned their greatest strength, their love for each other, into a weapon that nearly destroyed them. There's something else, Edmund said reluctantly. The foreign operation is still active. Marcus's counterintelligence work has been compromised by his exile, and, with you removed from your position, the agents are now targeting other people close to the government and the royal family. Isabella's expression hardened. They're still out there, still trying to damage Britain's interests, and they've succeeded in neutralizing 2 of the people who were working against them. Marcus is willing to return and share his intelligence, but he wants his exile formally ended and his reputation restored. And Edmund paused, struggling with the words he needed to say. I want you to return as well, not just because I love you and miss you, but because the crown needs you. The people need you. And I need you, not just as my wife, but as my partner in protecting everything we've built together. Isabella moved away from him again, clearly struggling with her emotions. You want me to return to the palace, resume my duties as queen consort, pretend that nothing happened? I want you to return as my equal partner, Edmund corrected. With full knowledge of the threats we face, full participation in developing strategies to counter them, and full assurance that I will never again make important decisions about our relationship without consulting you directly. And what about the public? What about Parliament? How do you explain to them that the Queen Consort who was exiled for security reasons is suddenly being reinstated? Edmund had been dreading this aspect of the conversation, but he knew honesty was the only path forward. We tell them the truth. We explain that you were the victim of a sophisticated foreign intelligence operation, that your exile was based on manufactured evidence, and that you were actually working to protect national interests rather than betray them. The truth will make you look foolish, Isabella pointed out. The king who was deceived by foreign agents, who exiled his innocent wife based on false evidence. Your credibility will be damaged. My credibility is already damaged, Edmund replied. The public loved you, Isabella. Your exile has created a scandal that grows worse every day. The monarchy needs you back, not just for your charitable work and public appeal, but as proof that the crown can admit mistakes and make corrections. Isabella walked to a bookshelf and picked up one of their wedding photographs, studying it as if trying to remember the people they had been that day. And us? Our marriage? If I return, are we trying to rebuild our relationship, or are we simply resuming a political partnership? The question cut to the heart of Edmund's deepest fears. I hope we can rebuild our relationship. I hope you can eventually forgive me for not trusting you when you needed my support most. But even if you can't, even if our marriage can't recover from what's happened, I still want you back as Queen Consort because that's what's best for the country. Isabella set down the photograph and turned to face him fully. Do you understand what you're asking me to do? You want me to return to the palace where I was humiliated, to work with the same advisors who orchestrated my exile, to smile and wave and pretend that being cast out of my home was just a misunderstanding that's now been resolved. I'm asking you to be stronger and more forgiving than I was, Edmund admitted. I'm asking you to do what I failed to do, put the needs of the crown and the country ahead of personal hurt and anger. And what if I can't? Isabella asked. What if the damage to our relationship is too severe to repair? What if I can't forgive you for choosing to believe the worst about me instead of trusting in our marriage? Edmund felt his last hopes beginning to crumble. Then, I'll live with the consequences of my mistakes. I'll rule alone, knowing that I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too proud and too frightened to trust in love instead of evidence. Isabella studied his face for a long moment, and Edmund could see her weighing everything they had discussed. The future of their marriage, the needs of the monarchy, the ongoing foreign threats, the possibility of rebuilding trust that had been shattered by deception and betrayal. I need time to think, she said finally. This is too important, too complicated to decide in a single conversation. I need to understand fully what returning would mean, what guarantees I would have that I wouldn't be cast aside again the moment another crisis arose. Edmund nodded, though his heart sank with disappointment. How much time do you need? Give me a week, Isabella replied. A week to process everything you've told me, to consider what's best for everyone involved, to decide whether I have the strength to return to a life that caused me so much pain. As Edmund prepared to leave the cottage, he realized that the next week would determine not just his personal future, but the future of the monarchy itself. If Isabella couldn't forgive him, if she chose to remain in exile rather than risk further betrayal, then he would face the rest of his reign knowing that his failure to trust and love had cost him everything that truly mattered. The week that followed Edmund's visit to the Cotswolds was the longest of his reign. Each day brought new complications from the ongoing foreign intelligence operation, evidence of how much damage his hasty decisions had caused, and growing pressure from Parliament and the public for explanations about Isabella's continued absence. Meanwhile, Marcus remained in Switzerland, refusing to return or share his intelligence until he received guarantees about both his own status and Isabella's treatment. Edmund found himself caught in a web of consequences that seemed to tighten with each passing hour. The Prime Minister was demanding action against the foreign agents, but without Marcus's intelligence, the government was operating blind. The public was growing increasingly skeptical of the official explanation for Isabella's departure, with social media campaigns calling for her return gaining momentum daily. Most devastating of all, Edmund had no idea what Isabella's decision would be. On the seventh day, as Edmund sat in his study reviewing security briefings that painted an increasingly dire picture of foreign infiltration attempts, James Morrison entered with news that made his heart race. Your Majesty, the Queen Consort has arrived at the palace. She's requesting a private audience. Edmund's hands trembled as he set aside the briefing papers. Where is she now? In the Blue Room, Your Majesty. She asked that you meet her there when convenient. The Blue Room held special significance for them. It was where Edmund had proposed to Isabella 8 years ago, where they had shared their first dance at their engagement party, where they had retreated during their earliest days of marriage when the pressures of royal life became overwhelming. If Isabella had chosen that room for their meeting, it suggested she understood the weight of the conversation they were about to have. Edmund made his way through the familiar corridors with steps that felt both eager and terrified. Everything depended on the next hour: his marriage, his effectiveness as king, the security of the nation, and his ability to live with himself regardless of Isabella's decision. When he entered the Blue Room, Isabella was standing by the tall windows that overlooked the garden where they had been photographed together countless times during their marriage. She wore a navy blue dress that he recognized as one of her favorites from their early years together, and her hair was styled in the elegant but understated way she preferred for important occasions. "Thank you for seeing me," Edmund said, though the formality of his words felt strange given everything they had shared. Isabella turned to face him, and Edmund was struck by how composed she appeared. The vulnerability and pain he had seen at the cottage had been replaced by a quiet dignity that reminded him why she had been so effective as queen consort. "I've spent the week thinking about everything we discussed," Isabella began, "and I've reached some conclusions that I hope you'll hear completely before responding." Edmund nodded, taking a seat across from her, and preparing himself for what might be the end of everything he held dear. "First," Isabella continued, "I've decided to return to my duties as queen consort, but with conditions that must be agreed to before any public announcement is made." Edmund felt a surge of relief so powerful that he struggled to maintain his composure. "What conditions?" "I want full participation in all security briefings related to foreign intelligence threats. No more protection through ignorance. No more decisions made about my safety or security without my input. If I'm going to be a target of foreign operations, I want to understand exactly what we're facing." Edmund nodded immediately. "Agreed. What else?" "I want a formal role in developing counterintelligence strategies. My experience with Marcus's deception, painful as it was, has given me insight into how these operations work. I want to use that knowledge to help protect others from similar manipulation." The request surprised Edmund, but he could see the logic in it. Isabella's experience as a victim of psychological manipulation could indeed be valuable in understanding and countering similar operations. "That can be arranged," Edmund said. "You'll have access to all relevant intelligence and a formal advisory role in security planning." Isabella moved closer to him, her expression becoming more personal. "Most importantly, I want us to rebuild our marriage on a foundation of complete honesty. No more secrets, no more protecting each other from difficult truths, no more making decisions about our relationship based on what we think the other person can handle." Edmund stood and walked to her, stopping just close enough to take her hands. "Isabella, I want that more than anything. But I need to know, can you forgive me? Can you trust me again after what I did to you?" Isabella squeezed his hands gently. "I can forgive you, Edmund. I understand now that you were facing an impossible situation with evidence that appeared overwhelming. What's harder to forgive is how quickly you chose to believe the worst about me instead of trusting in what we had built together." The words stung, but Edmund knew they were fair. "How do I prove to you that I won't make that mistake again?" "By involving me in decisions that affect both of us, by asking questions when something seems wrong instead of making assumptions, and by remembering that our marriage is our greatest strength, not a weakness that can be exploited by our enemies." Edmund lifted her hands to his lips, kissing them softly. "I love you, Isabella. I've spent every day of the past month regretting my failure to trust in that love when it mattered most." "I love you too," Isabella replied, tears forming in her eyes. "But love isn't enough if we can't learn from what happened. We have to be smarter, stronger, more united than we were before." They embraced then, holding each other with the desperate relief of people who had nearly lost everything that mattered to them. Edmund felt Isabella's tears on his shoulder and realized that his own face was wet with emotion. "There's something else," Isabella said when they finally separated. "I've been in contact with Marcus." Edmund's expression darkened with concern. "How? When?" "He called me yesterday. He wanted to apologize personally for the role his deception played in destroying our marriage. He also wanted to coordinate our return to public life to ensure maximum effectiveness against the foreign intelligence operation." The revelation that Marcus had contacted Isabella directly sent a chill through Edmund. What did he tell you? That the foreign operation is more extensive than anyone realized. The agents who targeted him were part of a larger network that has been infiltrating European governments for years. They chose to focus on our marriage because they recognized that our partnership was strengthening Britain's soft power and diplomatic influence. Edmund felt a surge of anger at the scope of the manipulation they had endured. They turned our love into a weapon against us. But they also underestimated our ability to recover from that attack, Isabella pointed out. Marcus believes that if we return together, presenting a united front and sharing what we've learned about foreign intelligence methods, we can actually strengthen our position rather than just restore it. The idea of working with Marcus again made Edmund uncomfortable, but he could see the strategic value. What does Marcus propose? A coordinated public appearance where we explain what happened, acknowledge the deception we all fell victim to, and announce new security measures designed to protect other potential targets. Marcus would return from exile with his reputation restored, but in a subordinate role that makes clear he's earning back trust rather than simply being forgiven. Edmund considered the proposal carefully. It was ambitious and risky, but it offered the possibility of turning their greatest vulnerability into a demonstration of strength. And you're comfortable working with Marcus after what he put you through? I'm comfortable working with him under controlled circumstances, with full knowledge of his methods and motivations, Isabella replied. He was as much a victim of the foreign operation as we were, even though his attempts to fight back caused us tremendous pain. Over the next several hours, Edmund and Isabella worked together to develop a comprehensive plan for their return to public life. They coordinated with Hawthorne to ensure that all security concerns were addressed, consulted with the Prime Minister's office to align their announcement with broader government anti-intelligence initiatives, and carefully crafted public statements that would explain the situation without compromising ongoing investigations. 3 days later, Edmund and Isabella appeared together at a carefully orchestrated press conference in the palace's stateroom. Isabella wore the sapphire tiara that had been a wedding gift from Edmund's grandmother, sending a clear signal that she was returning to her full role as queen consort. Edmund wore his military dress uniform, emphasizing the security implications of their announcement. My fellow citizens, Edmund began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced a severe test and emerged stronger. I stand before you today with my wife to address recent events that have affected our family and our nation. Isabella stepped forward, her bearing regal but approachable. 3 weeks ago, I was removed from my position as queen consort due to security concerns that appeared to show I had been compromised by foreign intelligence agents. Today, I returned to that position with the knowledge that I was not a perpetrator of betrayal, but rather a victim of sophisticated foreign manipulation designed to damage Britain's interests. Edmund continued the explanation, detailing how foreign agents had created false evidence, manipulated personal relationships, and exploited family conflicts to achieve their political objectives. He acknowledged his own mistakes in not investigating the evidence more thoroughly before taking action, but framed those mistakes as learning experiences that would strengthen the monarchy's ability to resist future attacks. Prince Marcus has provided extensive intelligence about foreign operations targeting European governments, Edmund announced. His exile is formally ended, his service to the crown acknowledged, and his cooperation with ongoing security investigations appreciated. Isabella concluded their joint statement with words that resonated far beyond the immediate crisis. The greatest lesson we have learned is that our personal relationships are not separate from our public duties. They are fundamental to our effectiveness in serving the British people. Love, trust, and partnership are not luxuries that royalty can afford to abandon in times of crisis. They are the very foundations that make leadership possible. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. The honesty of their explanation, the obvious sincerity of their reconciliation, and the strength they demonstrated in overcoming sophisticated foreign manipulation resonated with a population that had grown weary of political deception and manipulation. More importantly for Edmund and Isabella, their shared experience of betrayal, separation, and reconciliation had created a deeper understanding between them. They had learned that love alone was not sufficient to protect their marriage from external threats, but that love combined with complete honesty, mutual respect, and shared purpose could withstand almost any challenge. 6 months later, as Edmund watched Isabella address the United Nations General Assembly about international cooperation in countering foreign intelligence operations, He reflected on how much their relationship had changed. They were no longer the somewhat naive couple who had believed that love could conquer all obstacles. They were partners who had faced the worst that political manipulation could throw at them, and had emerged not just intact, but stronger and wiser. The foreign intelligence operation that had nearly destroyed them had ultimately failed in its objectives. Britain's negotiating position had been strengthened rather than weakened, public trust in the monarchy had been reinforced rather than undermined, and the royal couple's partnership had become a model for other leaders facing similar threats. But, perhaps most importantly, Edmund had learned that true strength as a king came not from making difficult decisions in isolation, but from building relationships strong enough to withstand any pressure that enemies might bring to bear against them. The crown's greatest protection was not secrecy or suspicion, but the trust and love of people willing to stand together against whatever challenges the future might bring. As Isabella concluded her speech to thunderous applause from the international community, Edmund knew that they had not just survived their greatest test, they had transformed it into their greatest victory. The foreign agents who had tried to weaponize their love had instead proven that love, when combined with wisdom and courage, was indeed the most powerful force in their world. Edmund finally looked directly at her, and Isabella saw that he was struggling not to cry. "Our marriage ends with your exile from the royal family. The divorce papers will be filed within the week." The finality in his voice broke something inside Isabella. She had hoped that even if she lost her public role, even if she faced disgrace and scandal, she and Edmund might find a way to preserve their personal relationship. The man standing before her now seemed like a stranger, someone who could destroy their 7 years together with administrative efficiency. "I see," Isabella said, standing slowly and smoothing her dress with shaking hands. "And I suppose there's nothing I can say, no evidence I can provide, no demonstration of remorse or commitment to making amends that would change this decision." "The decision is final," Edmund replied, though his voice wavered slightly. Isabella walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "I hope someday you'll listen to that recording, Edmund. I hope someday you'll understand that Marcus didn't just betray you through me. He destroyed something beautiful that we had built together. And I hope that someday you'll realize that love, even imperfect love, even love that makes terrible mistakes, deserves a chance at forgiveness." She left the study without waiting for a response, walking through the corridors that had been her home for 7 years with the knowledge that she was seeing them for the last time. Staff members she passed seemed to know already that something momentous had occurred, their glances sympathetic but distant, as if she had already become a ghost haunting the palace. In her private quarters, Isabella began the heartbreaking task of deciding what few personal belongings she would be allowed to take with her into exile. Everything else, the gowns, the jewelry, the official photographs, the life she had built, would remain behind, artifacts of a dream that had been shattered by manipulation and misplaced trust. As she packed, Isabella thought about the recording device she had left on Edmund's desk. Whatever happened to her, she hoped that someday Edmund would listen to it and understand the full scope of Marcus's deception. She hoped he would realize that she had been a victim as much as a perpetrator, manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to weaponize love and loyalty. But, most of all, she hoped that destroying her wouldn't be enough for Marcus, that his appetite for revenge against the royal family wouldn't be satisfied by her exile. Because if Marcus continued his schemes, Edmund would eventually see his brother's true nature, and perhaps then he would understand what Isabella had been trying to protect him from all along.